people who come from all different parts of the world can feel the same emotions, can communicate the same ideas of humanity. And how one learns that when you're very young is sort of difficult. I think it's harder today than it was when I was 9 or 10 years old. But I wanted to share with you one experience that I had when I was about 10 that certainly meant so much to me in understanding Johannes Brahms. It was a very ugly auditorium, not a beautiful one like this. I think it was a gymnasium even that was converted into an auditorium. And visiting our city when I was very young was the Robert Shaw Chorale. Now, Robert Shaw was one of the greatest choral conductors of the 20th century. He was a great Bach scholar. He made some of the greatest recordings and performances of all the Matthew Passion, the John Passion, the B minor Mass, all of the Bach repertoire, but he was also very famous for romantic literature, which he did with his choir, and then later, as the conductor, he was associate conductor of the Cleveland Orchestra when I was very young and playing with that orchestra, and he was then later the principal conductor of the Atlanta Symphony. But when I was 10, Robert Shaw came to do a choral concert. Now, I worry these days that sometimes even parents don't know to take their children to concerts where there are no violins. But my son and my daughter is studying the violin. How can she learn it? Oh, a lot. So my parents took me to hear the Robert Shaw Chorale. The first half of the program was very early music. There was some music from before the time of Bach, which was a new experience for me. My ears learned new kinds of sounds. Fascinating. And then there was a very small orchestra that assembled in the front of the chorale. And I looked on the program, and the next piece was the one of the great works of Brahms. And I certainly had known by that time a couple of the Brahms symphonies. I was kind of a fan, you know. And I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be very interesting. And I noticed that there was a contralto soloist that was going to play, sing this piece. And I didn't know who it was. Now, I had noticed that in the chorale, during the first half of the program, there was a very large lady. And she was singing with the tenors. And I thought, how curious. She must have a very deep voice indeed. But I didn't know that she was the one who was going to come out and sing the solo. And after the lights were dimmed, out came Mr. Shaw. The orchestra was there, the choir was there, and behind him came this woman, dressed in black, and looking as if she had been weeping. It was such an example of a person who had become already the piece even before the first note began. And she came out and she stood there. Now, in this piece, the orchestra plays a bit before the contralto comes in. And they played this dark and tragic music as the contralto looked down, and then she opened her voice, and the sound that came out was something I will never forget. And I followed every word in the German to understand what it was she was singing. And it is a piece that is about great tragedy followed by great hope. And it ends in C major in a glorious finale. I listened to that piece and I never forgot that moment. And I took it with me every time I worked on one of the pieces of Brahms. I started to realize how deep his emotions were and how what he had to say to his audience was enormous. The range of what he was able to communicate. Well, those are the kind of things that change a young life. I wasn't watching the violinists. I wasn't even watching the conductor, but I was understanding the depth of meaning in this remarkable alto rhapsody of Brahms. And it percolated down into my personality, into my understanding of Brahms's music throughout every piece of Brahms I have ever played. And then something very wonderful happened. About 30 years later, I was playing a concert in Atlanta. And I had just finished a chamber music concert. I don't recall if there was any Brahms on the program, I have no idea. But we finished the concert. Some friends of mine said, come, meet some of them. There's some musicians from Atlanta that are here, want to say hello to you. I walked down into the hall to say hello to some musicians. And there were 3 or 4 people standing there. One was a cellist, one was a violinist, I think, and then they introduced me to a woman standing there, rather substantial woman. And they said, Mr. Buswell, Florence Coppola. I said, Miss Coppola, thank you for something you gave me 30 years ago when I heard you do the Brahms Alto Rhapsody. And she smiled broadly and remembered, of course, touring with that wonderful group and playing and singing that piece. And I said, that taught me how to play Brahms.